News for November 4, 2020. I'm Bill McCullough, in for Lester Holt, who is on assignment. We interrupt our regularly scheduled program to bring you this breaking news update. President Trump announced this morning the suspension of a ballot counting in 6 states today, pending, quote, a stabilization of the situation so that we can preserve the integrity of the electoral process, which some Democrats in legal China have disrupted, unquote. At noon, he tweeted, "Real Americans, don't let sicko losers stop us from making our country great again. Stand our ground." The announcement followed Election Day confrontations in at least 8 states between armed groups of the Defend America poll watchers and long lines of those waiting to vote. In Arizona, gunshots flared after a dispute, wounding 8 people and killing 42-year-old father of 3, Emilio Torres. Torres had objected when a poll watcher told him to leave and go vote in Mexico. In Detroit, a 14-year-old girl accompanying her grandmother to the polls was also killed in an incident late Tuesday afternoon. The grandmother of the victim, Letitia Johnson, said she had been waiting all day to vote when one of the poll watchers told her to go home. Her granddaughter had argued that their civil rights were being violated, and a white man with a Confederate flag shot her. Michigan Governor Whitmer, pleaded for calm. In a related development, Attorney General Barr pledged at a news conference to continue his investigation into the meddling in the election by China on behalf of the Democratic Party. China has denied involvement and continued to demand the removal of 2 U.S. aircraft carriers in the South China Sea on what the White House has said are, quote, routine but necessary training cruises, unquote. Meanwhile, in Colorado Springs, Vice President Pence and 4 members of the cabinet held an open-air mass prayer of thanksgiving for our democracy, attended by high-ranking Air Force officers. Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos said that with Trump's ascendancy to a second term, God's glory to America would be restored. Trump Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany walked back a hot mic statement from Jared Kushner that due to the recent spike in COVID deaths and now the election riots and suspension, a new federalized rapid response police force numbering 25,000 would be deployed to the troubled spots. Kushner refused comment. Democratic leader Chuck Schumer demanded a truly bipartisan makeup of the commission to get to the bottom of this mess and work together to make sure that every citizen's vote will be duly counted. Speaker Nancy Pelosi counseled Democratic voters to remain calm, reassuring them that hearings would be held and a lawsuit filed. I'm Brian McCullough, and that's what you need to know tonight. Thank you.
Sound far-fetched? Don't be so sure. It may be understated. Recently, white supremacists with Confederate flags stormed the State House in Michigan. A black legislator had to wear a bulletproof vest and get an armed escort to return to work days later. By the 3rd time these mobs showed up, one of them carried an effigy that looked strikingly similar to Governor Whitmer, stripped naked and hung by a noose. Down in Texas, white supremacist militias are patrolling with arms to defend businesses that defy the law to reopen. And what's been the response of the governor? to back off the laws that he himself put in place and yield to the mob. As we broadcast, these militias are organizing to spread across the country and do the same in other states. And MAGA mobs demanding reopen are rallying in the streets in Michigan, in Minnesota, in Arizona, in Colorado, in Staten Island, in California, across this country. But don't just look at the streets. Even more, look up at the top. Look at the way Donald Trump is lionizing these protesters, feeding their sense of false victimhood.
They want their life back.
Excusing their threats of violence.
These are great people.
And egging them on. Listen as Jared Kushner pointedly refuses to guarantee that they'll even hold elections this November.
Commit that the elections will happen on November 3rd?
It's not my decision to make, so I'm not sure I can commit one way or the other.
Or listen to Trump as he repeatedly jokes that he'll stay in office not just one more term, but 2, 3, 4, maybe many more.
We go to 20, we go to 24. Did you see it? Then it says 28, 32, 36, 40, 44.
Listen as well as Trump amplifies conspiracy theories that obliterate not just facts, but to use the words of Steve Bannon, that flood the zone with shit, overwhelming people's ability to even sort out what's true. All the while, Trump suggests that members of the media and his ruling class rivals belong in prison. Listen to Trump's long history of accusing China of meddling in elections, including in 2018 and as recently as April 29th of this year, when he said that China intentionally released the virus to defeat him. Now this week, they're warning of a new Cold War. But he can't do that. He can't suspend the election. He can't stay in office if he loses, you might be thinking. That's against the law. Really? What law? Donald Trump declares that he is the law. And so far, the Republicans have backed him at every step, and no one has stopped him. We'll talk more about this in this episode. But remember this?
I have the support of the police, the support of the military, the support of the bikers for Trump. I have the tough people, but they don't play it tough until they go to a certain point. And then it would be very, very bad.
The obvious implication here is that they will play nice until they don't, which is increasingly the case. Now, to be very clear, the imagined future newscast that we began this episode with is not a prediction. We don't know how events will unfold, and neither do you. But we can say for sure that everything in that imagined scenario is something that has either happened in the history of this country or is being actively prefigured right now. If you don't know about this, you haven't been paying attention. And if you do know the pieces of it, you haven't been putting it together. You are suffering from fascism denialism, and this is every bit as dangerous as climate change denialism. And that's one thing this episode aims to cure. Now, it would be wrong to rule out the prospect that Biden might win the election in November. It would also be wrong to rule out the possibility that Donald Trump, faced with an electoral loss, might leave office peacefully, despite everything he's been building up and implying. But even if that were the case, all the political forces that have been built up inside the government, in the courts, in the state houses, in the military, in the police, they're not going away, and they're not giving up. And neither are the fascist mobs in the streets who've been called forth, who've been given a taste of blood, and whose sense of aggrievement will be inflamed at any such loss. And even more fundamentally, the material contradictions in this system of capitalism-imperialism as it exists in this country, the deep crisis it faces internationally and domestically, which have given rise to this fascism, are not going to disappear. As we will get more into in this show, and as we get into every week on the RNL, the Revolution Nothing Less show, it is going to take a revolution to get rid of this system that, among many other towering crimes that flow from its nature, has spawned this fascism, which now imperils humanity's future. And right now, this fascism must be confronted for what it is, and all people who oppose it, from a variety of perspectives, must be one to coming together and uniting to build mass, determined, nonviolent protest on the scale that is capable to drive it from power and defeat it. Bob Avakian has done extensive work over 3 decades on the rise of fascism in this country. And at the heart of this episode today, we're going to play a substantive excerpt of the speech he gave in 2017 called "The Trump-Pence Regime Must Go. In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. A better world is possible." But before we go there and to set the stage, we're going to show just a briefer excerpt of the opening of that speech from Avakian, followed by a reading of an excerpt of the statement that was published by refusefascism.org, the statement of conscience called "Silent No More."
We are confronted by, we are now being ruled by a fascist regime, relentlessly assaulting civil rights and liberties and openly promoting bigotry and inequality, acting with callous disregard or cold-blooded malice toward those they consider inferior and a drain or stain on the country, on a mission to deny health care to millions who will suffer and many who will die without it, crudely degrading women as objects of plunder, breeders of children without the right to abortion or birth control, subordinate to husbands and men in general, defying the science of climate change, attacking the science of evolution, and repudiating the scientific method overall. A regime brandishing an arsenal of mass destruction and threatening nuclear war, intensifying state terror against Muslims, immigrants, and people in the inner cities, unleashing and giving encouragement and support to brutal thugs spewing vile America first, white supremacists, male supremacists, and anti-LGBT venom. A regime that boasts of all this and declares its intention to do even worse. This has caused disgust, anger, and agonizing among huge numbers of people. And there have been many important acts of resistance, big and small, to the continuing outrages committed by this regime and its supporters. But the regime remains in power and is determined to ride roughshod over all obstacles to carry out its monstrous agenda. And the need for a massive outpouring of people acting together non-violently but with sustained determination to create a political situation where this regime cannot remain in power cries out. The organization Refuse Fascism, refusefascism.org, has put forward a call and a plan
Statement of conscience and a call to act. Silent no more, we say. The hour is late. For over 3 years, the Trump-Pence regime has brought an unrelenting barrage of insult, injury, and atrocity with catastrophic consequences for all of humanity. There are times in history when a people must reach deep into their collective conscience and act with extraordinary moral courage to stop the crimes of their government. We must say out loud what is too often spoken in whispers and riddles. An American fascism is here and advancing, wrapped in the flag in Mike Pence's Bible, taken literally, spreading its poison of white supremacy, misogyny, xenophobia, and oppressive fundamentalist traditional values. The world as we have known it is being torn asunder. Fascist regimes are taking root everywhere, as tens of millions of people are forced to seek asylum from wars, climate change, and enormous economic dislocation. Scientists have reset the doomsday clock that measures the dangers of nuclear war and the destruction of the environment to 100 seconds before midnight. The anti-science Trump-Pence regime hid the danger of the COVID-19 virus, now a pandemic, for months, setting the stage for possibly catastrophic impact on all of society and placing those who have been targets of their overall program in the most jeopardy. Immigrants forced into shadows and concentration camps, millions of black and brown people languishing in prisons, the people of Iran facing crippling sanctions, the poor, sick, and homeless here and around the world. The damage already done cannot be easily reversed, while worse is surely to come. We are on an increasingly unsteady ground, and any major crisis, international or domestic, could become the catalyst for this regime to drop the hammer. History has shown that fascism must be stopped before it becomes too late. Enough. We raise our voices here to say, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. The hour is late. If we do not intervene now, we cannot ask how the German people accepted the horrors of the Nazi regime. What we allow is not just what we condone, it is what we become.